So welcome to one of our last few events for Taylor 10 Week. I'm Sienna Abdullahad, and I serve as the Director of Finance and Operations for the Taylor Center. I am also a co-instructor of the Speculative Fiction for Social Change course here at Tulane University. And I am excited to join and support this panel with my colleague, Dr. Maggie Sheffer.
Hi, everyone. At the Taylor Center, I'm the Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact, and I am so thrilled to be a co-instructor for this new class alongside Sienna and Dr. Malia Fawnin.
So we're going to go ahead and let our authors introduce themselves, and we will start in the middle with Brittany.
All right, I'll start. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Williams. I am primarily a YA historical fiction author, although everything that I've written, including my short stories, are all speculative fiction. I started, and still am actually, and I started as an actor, and I still am an actor. My educational background is in musical theater and classical acting, particularly Shakespearean performance. And I loved reading as a kid, and I loved writing and making up stories as a kid. Went through a period in like middle school and high school with some not so nice English teachers that made me think that I wasn't smart enough to be a writer. And that kind of stuck with me for a while until in 2016, I started writing for this nerd culture site called Black Nerd Problems. And the other writers who write for that site are all basically, they're mostly poets, and they're some of the best writers I've ever met in my life. And the belief that they had in my writing encouraged me and kind of helped me get all that negativity out of my head and made me think that I could actually become a professional writer. And then I happened to marry a very prolific fantasy writer, this guy right here. And so his encouragement as well made it so that I published my first novel last spring. And, thank you. So yeah, that's Self-Same Metal, book 1 of the Forge and Fracture Saga trilogy, and its sequel is coming out April 23rd. It's called Saint Seducing Gold, and it's coming out on Shakespeare's birthday / death day.
How y'all doing? My name is Danny Cherry Jr. I write all type of stuff. I do freelance journalism on state, local, and national politics. I write crime novels, and I like to write speculative short stories. And I came to writing, I always wanted to be a writer as far as I can remember, as soon as I could take letters and form them into words. Except when I started out, I wrote comic books first, because I wanted to be a comic book writer. And then when I wanted to start my own independent comic book thing, when I was in college, I realized it cost way too much money, whereas a computer is free in the library. And I picked up some how to write prose fiction, and that's kind of where I came into writing fiction. And the journalistic part of it kind of came about in 2020 when a bunch of stuff was happening, and I kind of wanted to give my input on stuff. And my first novel came out last January, like 2 months ago, in January. Yeah.
What's it called?
Oh, it's like, this one's a crime novel, though, not a speculative fiction novel. I started this one when I was in college, when I was like 19 or 20 years old, so almost a decade ago. Jeez. But this one's like Sopranos, Peaky Blinders. It's pretty much a crime novel based in 1920s New Orleans.
Ooh.
What's it called?
Oh, The Pike Boys, like Pike like Ike, P-I-K-E.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And it follows the Pike family saga to overcome generational trauma, poverty, stuff like that in order to rise to the top of New Orleans society.
Hey,
Yeah.
that sounds cool.
It's more on the literary side, but there's also like a whole bunch of gangster stuff up and down.
That's the best kind of literary.
No, it is. It really
It's
is.
the only kind of.
Thank you. Yeah, got some copies on me, but you know, right over there. Anyway, I'm done.
Well, we could definitely talk more about that, because that sounds right up my alley.
Cool.
And next we have Daniel Jose Older.
Hey, everybody, I'm Daniel Jose Older. Before I start my bio stuff real quick, we have a kid who has the pukes right now. He's a toddler, and he's homesick, so I'm going to be checking my phone. My apologies. I don't usually do that during events, but know that it's not for Twitter. Just fuck Twitter. But yeah, it's just for that. It'll only be for that. The second thing is we are more than 150 days into a genocide in Palestine, and we're here talking about social justice that has to be at the forefront of our work. I know that's a big part of my work right now, is working for the freedom of Palestine, and we can never forget that. I'm not here to argue about it. Genocide is bad, that's it. So that said, I've been a writer for my whole life. I just, in January, put out my 20th book. I know, dude, that's crazy. Yeah, we can clap. Thank you. You know what? That's absolutely right. Let's clap for that. Because it's hard work, you know? I love writing, and people are like, how do you write so many books? I just really love writing. I didn't set out to be prolific. People kept throwing series at me, and I said yes, you know, because you do. I write for Star Wars, and I write my own stuff. I write comics, and I write novels. I write for all ages. And the quickest version of the origin story is that I was always a nerd. You know, I was always an absolute Latino Jewish nerd, like all Latino Jews. You know, we are nerds. That's our people. And I just grew up loving Star Wars and just obsessed with all that stuff. And then I also was like, but where are the Latinos? Like, we're not actually in there. Not that many Jews in Star Wars either, but that's another conversation. But yeah, you know, so just like feeling that lack. Like just as a kid, not having a language for it, not having an analysis, but knowing like there's a vacancy, you know, that's shaped like me. And then sort of feeling like that genre that I love so much doesn't love me back. And that's not cool, you know, and I didn't, again, like consciously do it, but I started to turn away from it as I got older, went to college, and I was just desperate for people that would tell me the truth about the world as I knew it, rather than people who were lying to me that I don't exist or that I'm only a villain or a clown or a cannon fodder. Because that's not true. So I started reading, you know, Bell Hooks and James Baldwin and Chetty Moraga, Gloria Anzaldúa, you know, the greats who tell you the truth. And that was dope. And I learned a lot. And I still am a nerd at heart, like not just a cultural nerd, but a nerd, a fantasy nerd. So I tried to come back around after I graduated, and my friend was a Harry Potter head, so I read some of that. And I was like, we're still doing this? It's still this, like, cool, it's cozy, but like it's still like white boy saves the world and everybody else is at best like a bit part and at worst a villain, you know, and that hurt my heart, honestly. But I found Octavia Butler and she changed the game. And the way I actually found it was that a student, when I was a 7th grader, my English teacher, Mrs. Inez Middleton in Boston Latin School, took me aside and just put a copy of one of her books in my hand, like very Dumbledore-esque, not for nothing. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And she was like, read it, dude. And I did, and it blew my mind. I didn't know what to do with it. It really took like 10 years to hit, you know, like, which is, seeds are a very Octavia Butler metaphor, but that's what it was. And when I came back around and remembered her and I read everything she wrote, and I was like, wow, you can really do this. Like, you can have these deep conversations about the world and what's wrong with it, and you can do it in the form of a really good story that like makes you inside of it. It pulls you in, and you need to know what happens next. And everyone up to that point had been telling me that you couldn't do that you couldn't bring politics into work like that because it would be didactic or you'd be preachy or all these other things. That's just when you do it badly. Octavia Butler said you could do it well, and this is how you do it, right? She really lit the way for so many of us. So she was really a guiding light for me. And then I started writing, and I never looked back. And here we are 20 books later.
Well, welcome to all of you. And thank you for taking the time today. And hopefully your son recovers very
Amen.
quickly.
Yeah, he'll be all right.
Yeah.
You say it like that. You'll be
So much faith.
Look, everybody pukes. Yeah.
So I'll tell folks now, I have I'm a podcaster, so I'm totally ignoring the cameras. Sorry. All right, so let's move on. Maggie.
Sure. Well, Daniel, you already wonderfully answered this question a little bit, but for the other two, I'm wondering, Brittany and Danny, if you could tell me, what are some books that you find really inspirational in your own work, especially, but not only as it relates to speculative fiction for social change?
Yeah, so I always loved Virginia Hamilton's children's work growing up. The book that I borrowed most from the library in middle school was her book, Her Stories. And so much so that I bought myself a copy as an adult, and I keep that on my inspiration shelf. Of course, Octavia Butler, Wild Seed. I had a really bad moment of writer's block, and I read 2 pages of Wild Seed and was instantly like, all right, well, let me get back to my desk. I love N.K. Jemisin, her 100,000 Kingdoms series. I read the entire trilogy in a single weekend when I was like in New York working a sample sale. Every break I had, I was not eating. I wasn't paying attention to anything else. I didn't go to the bathroom. I just read the books. Read them on the subway on the way to work. Read them on the subway on the way home from work. So, love those. And then my two favorite books are Howl's Moving Castle and Jurassic Park, which are like on opposite sides
We
of
need
the
that.
spectrum.
We need that crossover event.
It's like
immediately.
cozy and then dinosaurs destroying a capitalistic park and eating all these people and children trying to escape the horrors of this park that their grandfather built. So like, it's like those two things. They're the only two books that I've like carried with me from my high school reading list. And I've just, I don't know, man. I love magic in books. Growing up, my family bought me a lot of this series of children's fairy tales by Fred Crump Jr. And they're all fairy tales told and illustrated with Black characters. So Black Rapunzel, Black Cinderella, Black Beauty and the Beast, everything. So I never, as a kid, and honestly until high school, the idea that I couldn't be a princess because I was Black, that I couldn't do this or do that or have magic or anything because I was Black, it just didn't, that wasn't even a thought in my head. And so when I was confronted with that lie and kind of hesitated in calling it out, I want to, in my work, provide a similar like baseball bat to other kids like me. So when someone's like, you can't do that because, you don't look like the characters that you love. And it's like, actually, I know you're lying to me. So because I have this book, I have that book, I have this thing. So yeah, those are my inspirations. It's a lot though. I'm like everything.
That's wonderful.
It's going to be hard for me to nail down because I read so many different genres because I write so many different genres. But some books that instantly come to mind are How Long Till Black Future Month, or I think I said that wrong, by N.K. Jemisin. Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie. And Nathan Ballingrud's Northern Lake Monsters. I've read that twice. That's my jam right there. I love that. I love that collection. Like if y'all don't know who he is, he's a horror writer, but he writes more like the Haunting of Hill House type stuff, where like the ghost ain't the point of it. And for me, one of the best short stories of all time, obviously this is subjective, is called Wild Acre. And the monster is only in the first third of the story. And it's about this werewolf that kills everybody in front of him, but it's entirely an analogy for PTSD and stuff like that. And yeah, and outside of speculative, Fire Next Time is another book I really like. That's not speculative, but the way I approach my writing across the board, whether it's about politics, especially politics, I always think back to what would James Baldwin do, because to me, he's one of the bravest writers of all time. He was a Black gay man in the 1960s, and he was openly gay as well. And he was, he was getting it from every angle, and he was still speaking his truth.
That's right.
So, whenever I get kind of scared about some trolls coming at me online, I remember he was way more into stuff than I am.
That's right. That's real.
No, he really did. He
did.
would speak his truth regardless of what anybody else thought and what bridges he burned. And I really respect that.
Brave.
Definitely. So you talked a little bit about books that you enjoy and books that kind of lead you into the work that you're doing. We're interested in your pathway and also interested in your sources of inspiration. So what inspires you to write? You mentioned Octavia Butler, but and I've read Wild Seed, and I can only imagine what 2 pages.
Literally the first 2 pages,
Right.
like just
Okay.
literally the
Yeah.
first 2 pages.
Yeah.
I just love the way she puts words together, like the musicality of her sentences and this is probably going to reveal some stuff about me, but I just love the main character of that book and how she is this woman who has a core that she understands is true of herself, but she still is like the possibilities for her and what she looks like, who she's with, how she experiences the world. At one point, she literally turns into a dolphin. Like those possibilities for her are endless, and I love it. I love that. I love her. Yeah, it's just so So, I enjoy books both on a conceptual level and also on a like more mechanical sentence level as well. And I think that's the actor in me. And like I'm a Shakespeare lover. I've loved Shakespeare since I was in elementary school. And so language as music, word choice, informing character, all of that stuff is really, I'm really passionate about it. So I just love seeing how people put words together to form a person in your mind, in like a reader's mind, how people, like I love Lee Bardugo's descriptions, the way she describes the environment, the way she kind of weaves the world of her story. And it's just, yeah, it's nice to be able to enjoy things on like double levels, to enjoy it as a reader who's experiencing the story and to enjoy it as a writer who's watching another artist at work.
So like what inspires me to write is that I just love it. It makes me happy. I don't really need much motivation. like I wasn't joking when I was saying that. As far as like I remember, I was just compulsively writing because when I was a little bit of a weird kid, and I would just like sit inside and just scribble down ideas all the time before I even realized what I was doing. And I would get in trouble in school for like compulsively writing comic books and stuff like that. So like I don't really need much inspiration to do it. I never feel more like myself than whenever I'm alone with a page, because I like to write by hand sometimes, or when I'm with a laptop. So I do it because it gives me some type of fulfillment. Yeah.
For me, there's a lot of places for sure. It's similar. All that both of y'all said. I write because I would explode if I didn't. You know, like it really does feel that way, especially these days. But one thing I want to shout out for myself is like there's a lot of inspiration in the spoken word, and I think we kind of run past that sometimes as writers because we spend so much time with the written word, and it is our job. But the root of every story is spoken. Because we all go back to some kind of lineage of people saying these stories out loud before the written word. And I think that's so important because sometimes we really do it a disservice when we overly focus on things, when we overly privilege texts that are only written down. When the truth is some of the best storytellers in the world are illiterate. Or you know, have no ability to write, and that matters, you know, not just on a social justice level, but because those stories are bangers. And if you just slip past them because they're not literature, because they're not in the library, you're doing yourself and them a disservice. I was a paramedic when I transitioned into becoming a professional writer, and I did that job for 10 years, and paramedics can tell a story, man. Like you think it's a tragedy, but you're laughing, and that's good storytelling, you know? So I would learn a lot just from talking to my partners and us like shooting the shit after a call and like talking about how it went. And you know, there's an emotional core to that job that's very misunderstood often because we will laugh about people's worst days, but not in a callous way, because often we're the person that turns their day around and makes it one of their best days, right? So there's this active involvement in a situation, in a crisis, that I was very aware of going into the job, because I think as writers, sometimes as any artist, we can delude ourselves into thinking that we're outside of a story. You're never outside of a story. That's not a real thing. If you're a witness, but especially if you're a writer, if you're writing it down, if you're involving yourself in it to that level, you are part of the story. You can hide and pretend you're not, but you're lying. And we know you're lying. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, that there is no outside of a story. And being a paramedic, you literally have a duty to act. You have to go and help the situation. You're bound to do it legally, but also you're bound to do it by your own conscience because you showed up to help, so you better help, right? And I think I always took that as a message as an artist of how to move. And how to not delude myself into this idea that I'm somehow outside of something. So to that end, you know, I learned from the paramedics, I learned from the folks at the bodega, you know, I learned from my family, from all the storytellers around us. Like, that's one of the most important places. And it's not at the cost of reading, you know? I read a lot, but you gotta do both. You have to live, you have to live. And that includes listening. And that's the last thing I wanna say is listening is one of the most underrated tools of a writer. We need to learn how to listen to ourselves, to the people around us, to the people we're writing about, and for real listening, not listening like, okay, what you gonna say next so I can counteract you. No, like really actually the deeper kind of listening. That's one of your best skills, and if you don't hone it, it'll be dull, and so will your work.
I love the reference to oral traditions and storytelling. I mean, having come from a very historically minded family that's how our narratives pass.
Right,
That's how we stay engaged. A lot of our conversations at family events are all around storytelling, and I think it's what makes the written word so much more powerful is the dialogue that you see in the context and the dialect that goes into that writing. So you named something really important, and I love the Black stories, like the characters being Black in the book that you mentioned. And my mom, when I was about 8, gave me Julius Lester's Black Folktales. And it was a very similar vibe where it was like, I already know before I come into the space and you tell me what I'm not capable of or what's not happened in the past, that we already had these stories and we've now gotten them to kind of have that representation before you even get inspired to write. So I love that.
Awesome. So all of these questions were submitted by students, but I'm actually going to toss it to Gracie to read her question to us, and then I'm going to repeat it for the mics right after, so you'll hear it twice.
Cool.
But Gracie, take it away.
So when starting a book, where do you begin? The message, the audience, the characters, or even just an image?
So to say that one more time, when starting a book, where do you begin? The message, audience, image, character, somewhere else?
Vibes.
Just vibe it out of sometimes.
Vibes. That's a great question. No, I just talked.
I feel like I've been starting the whole time. Like
All right,
I'm always
Danny,
the first one to talk.
you're up.
She's like a woman, I should take that.
Where do I start? I write out of order, so I sometimes write all of my favorite parts first. And then as I'm going along, if like sometimes things will come up, I'm like, I should probably put that in the beginning. So like I sometimes write backwards, I'll start in the middle. Like I've already written for my second book, I've already written the ending, the middle part, the epilogue, prologue. So I'm kind of just trying to fill in the blank because I need some goalposts, and then everything else in the middle is just, I guess you can, improvisation, I guess. So it's like I'm a plotter when it comes to the big parts, and then I improvise everything else. And for short stories, what I start with is a title and the first line. I use that like a thesis statement of sorts. Maybe that's because I also write nonfiction. And like from there, I take that thesis statement and I try to build a world around it, because I have like a mental Rolodex of tropes, plot structures, all this other stuff. And when I have this thesis statement, I try to take all these different components I have in my head and build, a character or a setting around whatever I'm trying to talk about. So.
I love that. I can't believe we write out of order.
I know, that's wild.
Right. I have to go I even have to edit in order. Like I have to go top to bottom when I edit. So I think, for my first novel, I started with a question and kind of tried to branch out from that question. And that question was, what would happen if a person blessed with iron manipulation powers by the Orisha Ogun had to fight the European Fae who are vulnerable to iron. And I started it as an adult novel, did not work. So then I was like, okay, let me age this main character down. Made her 16, everything flowed from there. So since I'm in the closing parts of writing a trilogy, now I'm starting with, I start with my outline, I start with kind of the plan, like where I want to end up, and then I'm hardcore outlining now. Like I thought I was a pantser, and then I was like, I don't plot. I just write, very descriptive chapter titles before I write the chapters. And Daniel was like, that's an outline. And I was like, no, it's not. But it is.
It is.
So yeah, I start with either a question that I want to answer, or just kind of like dig with and then let things flow from there. Or I just start with my outline and then go on. I never stick to the outline though. I always deviate because, you don't. Outlines are lies. We tell ourselves.
I mean, they're structures, right? They're like loose structures. Yeah. For me, it's always different. Every project is really, really different, and I think step one is always just honoring that. Like, I've been a person who just runs into a book with a big idea or a single scene that I'm like, yeah, this is cool. What's gonna happen next? I don't know. Let me write and find out. And there's a certain thrill and chaos to that, and I recommend it if that's what the book wants. It served me well for like a good chunk of years of my career, like 12 books or something. But then there came a moment when a book was like, I need to be outlined, bro. And so I outlined it, and that was what it needed, And literally the sequel was like, no, just vibes, run with it. you have to listen. When I say listen, like this is part of the discipline of listening, is listening to the story that you're telling. And to me, that's one of the most fun parts. I love, especially early on, when it's all very like, what is this? Is it a comic? Is it a short story? Is it a novel? Is it for kids? What? You don't know, and you're sort of like poking and prodding. It feels like this wrestling match, you know, with an angel, where you're trying to figure out what the name of the work is. And I love that moment because it's like you're just asking these questions, you know, and you don't know. But when you find it, it is vibes to a degree. Like there is this spark where you're like, "Ooh, I like this," and then you follow the spark into a dark room, and you're like, "Wait, what?" You know, like there's that. Then there's that moment of like, "I have no idea what this is now," and then you're like, "Wait, what's that?" And you run after it. You know, like having ADD really helps actually. I highly recommend it. But you know, like there is a great joy in that if you allow it to be joyful, and if your deadlines allow it to be joyful, it can be really fun. So I try to follow that. The best example I have is that I was researching the Crow Hill neighborhood of Brooklyn, and it led me to learn about the Colored Orphan Asylum in Manhattan back in the day. And there were these Cuban sisters that were just dropped off there, these children. I think it was like 4 Cuban girls, and they were dropped off there unceremoniously, picked up a couple months later and whisked off. And they're just like a footnote in a book about, you know, a much bigger topic. And I was like, what? We were there? You know, like that moment of like, there were Cubans in New York in 18 what? You know, like lost my mind. I knew it, but I didn't know it. You know, you never hear about it. And then the record just ends, you know, like that is where the archive ends, and then that's where our imaginations have to take over. And mine always does, and immediately it was like, well, what if they escaped, you know? Or what if they got away and like went into the streets of New York, and like, what if they could ride pterodactyls? Like, that'd be so dope, right? And that's what happened. That one question really did turn into an entire trilogy called the Dactyl Hill Squad, because it was so obvious. It was like, this is a kid's book, and there are dinosaurs. You know, words of dinosaurs. But it's those sparks, and then the question then becomes, how do you follow that spark to where it needs to go and bring your side to it?
Yeah, and like to your point, you have to approach it with curiosity.
Right.
And with flexibility. And like Daniel said, everything you write may be different. The question, like I said, may spark one thing. A scene that you want to write, the ending of something, or the middle, or the beginning, like that may lead you down the path to writing your next thing. You just need to, be aware of it, not try to put yourself into any kind of box so that you miss that spark of inspiration before you can like let it grow into a fire. And you just gotta, once it hits, if it won't leave you alone, you run with it.
That's right.
Go, just go.
Yeah.
Just go. You may not end up publishing it. You may have to put it down eventually and then come back to it. Every bit of writing that you do makes you better at the craft. So there's never any wasted work. And just kind of follow it until until the next thing hits, then you got it. And yeah, it's all about curiosity. It's all about just being open and ready for whatever happens.
Do you have a fear of showing your work, or did you ever have a fear of showing your work? And how'd you get over that fear?
You know the first one.
You
Y'all scared right now. See?
I know, right?
No, I always like let my love of the craft overpower any fear I have, because I know that's part of it and it helps you get better. I do have like slight anxious moments, especially when I started out, because I had my first beta reader was very brutal. Man, broke my spirit for a while, but anyway. But then I got back on the horse and started sharing my work again. But yeah, for me, I just let the fact that this is the thing I am obsessed with doing overpower any fear that I have, because I know if I want to get better at it, this is a part of it. So.
Love that. Okay.
Oh, me? Okay. Yes, I am afraid to show people my stuff, but because I am an actor first, that gave me a thick skin. You have never felt rejection like when you are asked to come into a room, sing your best 8 bars, which is literally a sentence, and as you are singing your heart out, you watch the 3 people who could potentially hire you as they all look anywhere but at you, don't even look at you when they say, thank you so much, and then you just have to walk out the door. So like after that, I'm like, oh, I'm good. I'm good.
That's real.
it's always nerve-wracking to show your work because you put your heart into it. And like to reveal your heart to a bunch of strangers is terrifying. And another thing that gets me through it always is that everybody's not gonna like your story, and that's fine. Everybody doesn't have to like it. That's totally okay. There are gonna be people who love it. There are gonna be people who hate it. It doesn't matter. Do you love it? That's the key right there. And then I'm afraid to read my own work sometimes, so. Because I'm my own worst critic.
I've been there.
So.
I hear that. I mean, and to jump off from what you just said, that's early on especially, and to this day, like when I was first starting out writing, I was also an organizer and doing community organizing work and activism and stuff like that. And I got into writing, knowing that was a part of my work, is that, I was going to be writing stuff that would hopefully, piss off racists. Like that was like basic. But I think it's like really important to know who you're writing for to that end, because you are going to piss people off probably if you're doing your job. But you want to make sure you're pissing off the right people, and if I ruined a racist day, that's cool. Like I did my job. But if the people that I'm writing for are mad, then that's a question I have to address within myself and my work. And we always have to do that. That's part of writing and being alive. So, I do struggle with that. I think a lot about it. But also like it's good to have stuff like that, like to Brittany's point, like if you've had a moment where you felt that fear and you overcame it, or you didn't, but you experienced it and you survived, then you overcame it, right? And to remember that. And Star Wars has some very interesting fans online. I don't know if y'all know, but they have lots of opinions, and some of them are very strong opinions. And I knew that, going into Star Wars. God bless it, it's a beautiful fandom. Some parts of it are beautiful. So I was like, whatever I write in Star Wars is an extreme example of what I just said because of the passions that run so high in that world. So that sort of like my early part of my career gave me practice for that moment, and that moment has given me practice for this moment. And that's how you live, and that's how you create, your sphere of healthiness and self-care as you go into any art industry, is by learning from all the things you've done before.
Yeah, and like Danny was saying, you having a cruel beta reader early on, that can really set you back.
I still think about that, man.
Man,
That's hard.
that's rough.
Like your English teacher.
Yeah. Well, it was more than one English teacher, sadly.
Hope he's doing terrible. But I would like to. So I do want to revise. Well, not revise. So I want to add on to what I said, because I took the question to be like sharing amongst the community, beta reading and whatnot. Yes, I have felt fear on sharing, like especially more of my political work, because I wrote about the book banning attempts in Louisiana, and the group, like somebody like months before me, was getting death threats simply for saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't pick on any one group. And she started getting death threats, getting called a pedophile on the internet. And I was like, I don't know if I should publish this story. And I even told the editor I want to change my name and put like some fake pseudonym. And he called me and he was like, I don't think you want to do that. And I was like, why? Because you're going to look back on this and you're going to wish that you would have been being said this way, but brave enough to put your name on it. So I went through with it, logged off of Twitter for a while because I knew what they was doing to this woman, and I got over it because there's a story I need to be told, and nothing happened. I mean, the organization I'm thinking of, they liked the post, and then they didn't send me death threats. So.
Well,
They didn't really like it though.
I'm trying to think. I've gotten called some really terrible things, and I had someone email me personally 10 separate emails with evidence of like black on black violence or black on black crime. And I was like, all I said was, stop hating on this teacher for trying to teach diversity in her high school. Cool. But you lock down your internet, lock down like all of your information on the internet, especially if you are trying to speak truth to power, because people on the internet are super weird
And bored.
And they feel this like fearlessness from behind their own keyboards.
Right.
And
Say that to my face.
And they are also some of the most frighteningly powerful investigators you have ever seen. They will take a picture, a selfie that you took that shows a glimpse out your window and be able to like pinpoint where you live. So just be careful. Just start locking it down. Everybody doesn't need to know everything about us on the internet. So.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
It's rough out there.
transition. I appreciate y'all's vulnerability because that's saying a lot about what you experience on a day to day, and as you're going through just trying to be writers, right? Just trying to put the word out, just trying to tell your stories, and the fact that people are retaliating against that, and also going so far as to figure out where you live and how to track you down, and whether you have to use pseudonyms, and that's a lot to deal with. But it definitely makes us think about this idea of how speculative fiction or different types of fiction can get us to thinking about the real world, the current world that we're in. So how has this imagining of new worlds, the ability to write in the fiction space, how does that change how you feel about the current world?
For me, it's this like circular process. So the stories I'm writing affect how I look at the world and the world I'm experiencing, and the world that I hope to create affects what I write in my stories. And particularly when writing fiction, it's very easy to fall into, or speculative fiction, it's very easy to fall into the trope traps that white male writers have laid out before us. So, with, treating the other in a certain way, treating like aliens or non-human characters in a specific way, being careful about how you describe certain characters. Like when I described the Fae in my book, I had to be conscious of whether I was giving othering features to the character Puck in my book is non-binary, and I had to be careful to make sure that I wasn't falling into that trap of like the non-binary character who is like has all of these inhuman features and stuff, and like falling into those tropes. It's been interesting trying to navigate. The book centers around a war between the mortal world and the Fae realm, and understanding, like with the understanding of colonization and what that looks like in our world, making sure that I don't tell a story that can be seen as giving a pass to colonizers, or giving a pass to any any group that has power over another and is trying to like expel someone, particularly right now. And because I deal specifically in historical fantasy, just being aware of the history that we're so often taught, and understanding where particularly women of color scholars have just kind of poked holes in all of these expectations, or all of these stories that we've been given as truth, and showed them for the falsehoods that they are. Just trying to bring that forward in a way that is more poppy and like easier, particularly for teens to grasp. And like I said, to like take that magical baseball bat to this history that we've been told that is so often a lie. And also, I like to find like interesting parts of history and like these like fun trivia facts, and just put them in my books. So because I'm the trivia taboo queen. Like give me like, I'm gonna give y'all, if you want me on your trivia team, I got you. Like we're gonna have it. So if you read my books, you're gonna have it for trivia. So all of that, just kind of like taking in the way that I've had my life and my perspective changed by the speculative fiction stories that I've read, and trying to also add to that tradition with my own work. And to make racists mad.
Let's go.
Yep.
So writing and reading speculative fiction has definitely like opened up my worldview in general, and made me think about just, stuff. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like speculative fiction is the best way to come to like view the world, because it gives you this healthy distance between the political environment right now, and by putting it on a different planet, or adding robots and all this other stuff to it, and all this other stuff. And for me, writing it, and because I like to write about people that are completely different than I am, that's also enhanced my empathy and just my worldview. Because I went to high school at a segregated school. Like, and my class was the school that desegregated essentially. And, going to school in a rural area, you think you're open-minded until you get out into the real world and you're like, oh, there's a whole lot that I've learned that maybe isn't the best thing. So when I started reading speculative fiction, especially the more political stuff, I started to realize, oh, this is just an analogy for that. And then, it gave me more empathy. So that's how it's like changed the way I interact with the world, is I'm far more open-minded now than I would have been years ago.
Yeah, something I've been really thinking about since October especially is the discipline work of hope. It's hard. It takes like work, being hopeful when things are this bad. And, that includes like failing at it. Hard work includes failing, period, always. Finding balance includes being off balance. There's no way to just land at the balance point. But it feels very off kilter when we're looking for it. And I do think the role of speculative fiction, one of its roles is not in the corny way of like optimism. It can never lie to us, and that's the caveat. You can't, and obviously we're talking about fiction, so the kind of lie that's in opposition to the truth with a capital T, right? You can't tell us everything's gonna be fine, because it's not. But you also can't tell us that like everything is absolutely not worth it, because it is worth it. Whatever that struggle is, it's worth it. I know those two things are true. They feel like they're at war, but they're actually in balance. And that's the work, I think. I don't like when stories like 1984 or Brazil end on a note, spoiler, that there's no hope. I think that's really not helpful. I don't think it's good storytelling. And I don't think it's good for the world. And I think the books we write, it matters whether or not they're good for the world. I don't think that makes them pedantic. I think it matters. It's important, the work that we put into the world. And so if you tell people like, okay, cool, resist, but you're gonna end up with a bullet in the back of your head anyway, what that really tells people is don't resist. What's the point of resisting if that's your end, right? But there's so many great works by great authors that talk about, like that things are really dark and there is a way forward. And I think that's where we have to find it. And it's that tricky balancing act of being like, there are very, very heavy and powerful things working against us a lot of the time for us to be as fully human as we need to be and to be as fully one with each other as we need to be. And the fight to get past that is worth it every single day, no matter what. That's a good story beat. Like that's good storytelling. The fight not being worth it is not good storytelling. And it's also good politics to say that the fight is worth it, because the fight is worth it, it's true. But it's a fight. And fighting is what stories are about, conflict. It doesn't always mean two armies bashing up against each other. It can be the internal conflict of understanding yourself. That's still good storytelling, and that's still talking about the world and the way to get through some of these heavier times.
Yeah, and the power of speculative fiction is that you can kind of sneak these huge conversations, these huge issues that you wrestle with in under the radar, under the disguise of magic or a secondary world or space and things like that. And it makes it easier for some readers to ultimately question their expectations as opposed to giving them a textbook or a nonfiction book or even a literary fiction book. It's this wonderful Trojan horse that lets us really shake people's minds up in the best way.
I love that you're hiding trivia facts in the space at a time in which books are being banned in schools, and it's an opportunity to put the curriculum where it may not be hunted down in a space where people still have access to it. So that is awesome.
I love that. Our next question is going to come to us from Kayla.
Hello.
Hey.
So my question a little similar to the one before, but I'm going to throw a little nuance onto it. How have the fictitious worlds that you've created impact how you exist and interact with this world, and does it change as you continue to write?
I'm going to re-say that real fast. How have the fictitious worlds you've created impacted how you exist and interact with this world, and has it changed as you've continued to write?
I really love the idea of these kind of islands of resistance that popped up throughout history. in lots of different ways of just people being who they are, people standing up for themselves in good and bad ways. You know, I think those are fascinating. And so in my historical work, I've like really gravitated towards those with the Dr. Hill Squad series. Once I realized that these kids were out in New York City in the 1860s, then it became like, well, who are they hanging out with? And turned out there was this group called the Vigilance Committee that was some really badass organizers that were doing a lot of work against slavery in New York in that era, when slavery was technically illegal, but happening in different ways. And ships were coming into the port illegally, the slaver ships. And so these cats would roll up on the ship, like armed, and free everybody and arrest the slavers. So just finding out about that, like that should be in every history book in the world, as far as I'm concerned. That's a heroic freedom work that we don't know about because it was black people doing it, and white supremacy can't tolerate black people, standing up for themselves in history unless it's in that very specific and friendly way to white people. So, that's a tragedy unto itself, but that's also very inspiring to see these different acts of resistance throughout history. So then, when I'm writing non-historical work, those figures and those movements and those moments are always with me. And they translate into characters and situations in fantasy realms. And then that, in turn, translates into how I move through the world, with the knowledge that those things were real, that those things are real in the future and in our imaginations. And that's how things happen, is that we imagine them, and then they become real. That's how we get to a better world, is by imagining that better world collectively and figuring out what it looks like so that we can collectively fight like hell to get it.
I'm still thinking of the best way to articulate my question.
So for me, my work it's made me braver, particularly as I am asked to come out into the world and talk about this thing I created. I was brave enough to put it on the page. I'm brave enough to want to see it on the shelves. So I should also move through the world with that same level of bravery. It's made me more, kind of more sure in myself and my identity, but also more curious about ways that can still shift and change, particularly because I write for young people and for teenagers. That desire to be brave and to confront the things that I can change is stronger and stronger and stronger. I just want to be. I want to move through the world as a very obvious safe space for Black children, for queer children. Like, they know that they can. When I go into a space, I want my peers to know that, like, I'm someone they can talk to. I'm someone they can trust. I want to use the power that I do have to kind of bust the all of the world's dishonesty in the face in the name of making a world better for those who are coming behind me, and even those who are walking beside me. And in that whole thought of wanting to tell the truth about history, as a Shakespeare lover from age 8, I spent so much of my life being told that I could only enjoy his works or even perform in his works by special invitation from the people who really had ownership of Shakespeare, because there weren't any Black people in the Europe, and particularly in England in that time. So if you want to be in it, okay, but you can be a big character, you can be this, you can be that. You're not a man, so you can't be Othello, you can't be Aaron the Moor. You just have to kind of stand in the back unless we let you get a bigger part, maybe. And it took me until adulthood to understand that those were lies they were telling. And I just don't want any other nerdy kids to go through that. I don't want anybody to, any other, queer kids to feel like they're an anomaly. I always say I want kids to feel like you are different and you are an individual, and you are wonderfully made, but you are also absolutely normal. Whatever you whoever you are, however you are. So I do both with my work and in talking about my work, and in moving through the world now that my work is out there. I just want to approach everything with that same bravery. And also the bravery that my character approaches the world with. She's 16 years old and fighting in a Fey war. Like, come on, I could do that too. I could at least talk about my stuff.
So from writing speculative fiction, I've found that to some extent as I've started, like, you know, at the end of college on and throughout my 20s, like I feel like it's made me more political to some extent because a lot of my writing is based in some part of real history. Like the story I submitted to Maggie, Town Full of Broken Tin Men, that's an analogy for the Vietnam War and the aftermath of World War II. Whenever the men got home from war, and, you know, put them in these suburbs, and everything's, look, you know, we think of it as like these happy days type years. But them dudes was up in there struggling with PTSD and alcoholism and drug addiction, and that's pretty much what that story is an analogy for. And through writing from the perspective of people who I otherwise just on face value probably wouldn't agree with, that gives me more empathy, and also to some extent makes me way more political, because vets are still being treated like dog crap to this day. You know, there's a lot of critique of obviously the military-industrial complex. I'm no stand on that part, but just on the human aspect and what it does to the actual real human beings. That's, you know, it's to sum it up, because I could rant about this all day. It's made me far more political and far more empathetic too.
I love that y'all have together, y'all kind of weave, I think, different levels of analysis as it relates to systemic approaches or systemic level of dealing with the world, with world building, kind of the placement in those various spaces, or the interaction between characters, the interaction between communities in your stories, and then getting it to the individual or the internalization of the way that the world shows up, and all of the treatments that y'all have given to your characters and to your stories. It seems like that has been very clear. So I don't know if y'all need to get a box set together. We can just go ahead and get that out to the people, and give them that analysis of structural issues and oppression and how it shows up. I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
Maybe from a student?
Yeah.
Okay.
Patrick, I hear you have a final question for us. It's the perfect one.
In what ways do you see yourselves as agents of social change?
Do you see yourselves as agents of social change, and how?
I think storytellers in general, whether it's by choice or not, are agents for social change, because like I use the analogy of a Trojan horse. Like if people don't like being given didactic lessons, take that word you used. They like, you have to sneak information through the back door into people's minds, and like as you write about different characters and whatnot, whether you're trying to make social change or not, you're exposing people to different types of people. So like if you move it outside of speculative fiction, and let's say Grey's Anatomy, for example, one of the most popular shows of its time when it first came out, for a lot of people, especially in the rural area that I went to high school in, that was the first and probably last time they were ever going to see gay characters or a Latino surgeon or whatever. Right. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, I do think writers can be agents of social change, and yes, I do consider myself one.
And let's be real, Grey's Anatomy is speculative fiction. Let's be real.
Correct.
I definitely agree. Like art, like the artists, like you know, so many artistic traditions began in religion, in, you know, passing along cultural information. If we even look at the foundations in religion, when you really break down certain holy texts, you find very practical things told in a very mystical way. Information delivered to people so that they could remember it, but if you like look at it at its core and like place things historically, you can be like, oh, well, it makes sense that they said like, oh, you can't do this, or oh, we pray to this God, or oh, you need to do this in veneration of this because at this point in time, these things were happening in the real world. So like I can track the real world application of these more magical, mystical things. And also the Trojan horse thing, trying to sneak in. I want to catch the people who are hungry for change and hungry for the truth of the world. And I also want to catch the people who haven't even gotten there yet. They don't even realize they're being lied to. I want them to start to question themselves and to start to kind of wake up to things to kind of instigate that curiosity. I want my work to breed the next like generation of writers, next generation of creators, next generation of scholars. Like I want everybody to, I want to kind of keep the ball rolling, just the same way that the writers who I read as a kid inspired me to kind of, you know, make the world that I wanted to see and then better. And it's, even if you don't set out to change the world or change minds, change hearts with your art, it's gonna be there. You put yourself, your perspective, your beliefs about people, your politics, it always ends up in the work, for good or for ill. We've seen that with some people who have some pretty horrible ideas about the world, how that bleeds into their work even without them meaning to put it there. So I think that it's extremely important if you are trying to make the world a better, more honest, more loving, more open place, that you write with that knowledge, and just write with that knowledge and understanding. The pretending that that's not the truth of your work as an artist is telling yourself a lie. So.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You'll hear so many writers be like, "Oh, I don't put politics in my work," and you know they're lying to you. Or sometimes they'll go, because I ask other writers about this. You know, we all hang out, and I'll be like, "How do you all think about the politics in your work?" And a lot of times they'll just be like, "Well, you know, hopefully it works out or whatever." And it's like, dude, like writers never throw their hands up about any aspect of craft. You never hear a writer be like, foreshadowing? Well, hopefully it's in there. I don't know. Like, that's not what writers do. Writers love being like, oh, here's how I did it. And it was really meticulous and thoughtful, but this is my strategy. Like, politics is an element of craft. And you have to be strategic with it, just like you are with rhythm, you know, just like you are with momentum, with action, with character work. All of that is, because why, like, the same people will also tell you this: conflict is the heart of story. It's the backbone of story. It's the symphony of story. They will give you all the cool metaphors and similes about conflict, how central it is to story. And it is. Stories are about change, and usually change that comes from conflict. Absolutely, 100%. How are you going to write about conflict if your concept of conflict is good versus evil? That is boring, it is dull, and it is fake, right? We're past that now. Like, we got to keep moving. But when you say you're divesting from politics, you're basically just giving up the most essential part of your story and just hoping it works out great. Because within around every conflict, there is a context, which is the world that you're building. And if you want to pretend politics don't exist there, it's going to be a boring ass world. You have to understand power to write about conflict. And if you don't look at the power around you in this world, you will not be able to create interesting power in the worlds that you are creating. That's why I always think of art as a double-edged sword. A lot of folks will be like, yes, art changes lives. Art is so powerful because it, like, you know, changes lives for the better, is often unsaid but clear. And behind that is an assumption that every artist is out for the betterment of all humanity, and we know that's not true, because we've seen a lot of artists, like you said, just be really harmful with their creations because they have harmful ideas about a hierarchy of humanity and who's more important and who's more worthy of life and who's more worthy to be a protagonist. That's been the history of Western literature, essentially. And now we're starting to see that break open because a lot of us have been loud about it and put our careers on the line to be activists and say, like, that's not cool, actually, just seeing ourselves as villains. That's not okay. It took people putting careers on the line over and over to get any kind of change. And we're still fighting that fight. There's still a long road ahead, you know, but part of that whole thing is understanding that art can do harm. Art can be harmful. And we don't want to think that, because that gets very close to then talking about censorship. But we have to be able to have that nuanced conversation, because art can cause harm, it can hurt the world, and it can save the world. And we are not storying responsibly unless we own that. And our one job is to do this responsibly, to tell a great story and to do no harm. And that's hard. That's not a simple thing. It sounds simple, it's not. And all of you know that because you've all been harmed by stories in different ways. Every one of us has. Whether that's stories about in our community or stories that tell us who we are and who we're not, and who we can't be. So it is for us. That's something it's a responsibility, and I take it very seriously, and I love my job, and I love stories, and that's what's the requirement of loving your job and telling stories, is doing it in a way where you're not going to tell people they're less than.
Yeah, we wrapping up. Oh, just one last thing. I'd agree with you a lot. Like, because, like people say words don't hurt. That's bullcrap. Words have a lot of impact. And like, yeah, you got to tell stories responsibly, because as soon as you said that about how, art can be bad, I thought of the Turner Diaries. That's a very popular fictional book amongst neo-Nazis and mass shooters.
Yes.
And then I thought of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. A lot of the more militant far-right people love that book, are obsessed with that book.
That's hard.
Like, so it's like, use your words very carefully, because words become thoughts, thoughts can become actions. So that whole Trojan horse thing can definitely be used for nefarious means.
If you ask the Trojans, it was. So the Greeks are like, no, it's great. It was wonderful.
That was a harmful ass horse statue.
Nope, hated it. Right.
So,
we thought it was a gift.
So yeah, write responsibly. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much to each of you for taking the time with us today, and to the students for your awesome questions that you asked and took the time to consider as you read the works of each of the authors, which is a part of the course. And thank you to the Taylor team, and I think Tamia is around here somewhere. Tamia Toomer helped us put a lot of this together, so I want to give her flowers now.
Thank you to our professors.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Fonda. And thank you to the Howard Tilton Memorial Library team, because technically we're not supposed to be in this room yet.
Oh, wow.
We got a little bit of early access.
right.
So thank you again to each of our authors for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Y'all
Thank you all.
have
Thanks
a
for having us.
wonderful afternoon.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.